If you have ever kept a secret so long that it started keeping you, shaping your days, changing the way you moved through your own home, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Because what happened on the Family Feud stage on one afternoon in the winter of 2024 was not a game show moment. It was a marriage arriving at its own reckoning, live, in front of 500 people, and Steve Harvey had to decide in real time what a person with a microphone and a responsibility is supposed to do when the world on his stage stops being television. There are secrets that stay secrets. They are carried quietly for years, buried under the ordinary business of a shared life. The grocery runs and the school pickups and the Sunday dinners and the arguments about the thermostat. These secrets are managed, they are maintained, and the people who carry them become, over time, extraordinarily skilled at the maintenance, so skilled that they occasionally forget the weight of what they are holding until something, somewhere, shifts. On this particular afternoon, the thing that shifted was a phone. It buzzed, at the wrong moment, in the wrong pocket. On a television stage where 500 people were watching, and a man named Steve Harvey was standing close enough to see exactly what was on the screen when the notification appeared, and his wife looked down and understood, in the space of 1 second, everything she had been trying not to understand for a very long time. What happened next, what Steve Harvey chose to do, what the wife chose to say, and what the husband was left with is a story about the moment that arrives in some marriages when the managed secret becomes unmanageable, when the stage is pulled away, when the only thing left is the truth, standing in the light, waiting to be dealt with. Stay with this one. It will stay with you. Renee Garrison was 52 years old. She had grown up in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, the middle child of a large, loud, church-going family that believed in three things above all else: hard work, plain speech, and the understanding that love was not a feeling you waited for but a decision you remade every morning. She had carried those beliefs into her adult life, and her adult life had, for the most part, rewarded her for it. She had spent 21 years as a social worker in the New Orleans metro area, working with families in crisis, navigating the overlapping systems of child welfare, addiction services, housing assistance, and domestic support with the particular combination of firmness and compassion that the work required, and almost never received adequate recognition for. She had been promoted 4 times. She had trained 11 junior caseworkers, 3 of whom had gone on to supervisory roles of their own. She was the kind of professional whose departure from a team was not replaced by a single hire but by 2, and even then the gap was felt. She had been married to Marcus Garrison for 24 years. Marcus was 55, a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in New Orleans, a man who was, by every external measure, a solid and reliable presence, present at dinner, present at the children's events, reliable with the mortgage and the car maintenance and the weekend repairs that households require. He was not romantic, had never been especially romantic, but he was steady in the way that some people mistake for safety, and that Renee had, for a long time, accepted as sufficient. She had begun to notice things approximately 14 months before the taping. Small things, individually dismissible. A phone that was always face down, a new passcode she had not been given, a habit of leaving the room to take certain calls, a quality of distraction in the evenings that she had initially attributed to work stress, and then, as the months accumulated, had begun to attribute to something else without fully allowing herself to name it. She had not confronted Marcus directly. She had asked herself more than once why she had not, and the honest answer was that she was not yet ready for the answer a confrontation might produce. She had 3 children, Anton, 28, Lisette, 25, and Cora, 22, who had grown up in a home that worked, that functioned, that had never been broken. She had a career built on helping families navigate damage. She had perhaps been too close to the consequences of broken things to be fully willing to look at the fracture in her own. The Family Feud application had been Lisette's idea, submitted as a Christmas gesture in the same spirit that adult children sometimes arrange family activities, as a way of holding the family in its familiar shape at a time when the familiar shape feels, for reasons they cannot quite articulate, precarious. Renee had agreed to go. She had thought a day out together might feel like something good. Marcus had been enthusiastic. He liked competitions. He liked winning. He had researched survey trends for 3 evenings running and arrived at the studio in Atlanta in a good mood, dressed well, carrying the particular energy of a man who is performing normality so fluently that he has, for the moment, convinced himself entirely. Cora, the youngest, was the 5th team member. She was quiet in the way of a youngest child who has spent her life reading the room. She noticed things she always had. On the drive to Atlanta, she had watched her parents in the front seats and had thought, without examining the thought too carefully, that the space between them felt different than it used to. She had not said anything. She had put her headphones in and watched the highway. Anton and Lisette rounded out the team. They were warm, competitive, and glad to be there. They knew nothing of their mother's suspicions. The day, from the outside, looked completely ordinary. The Garrison family was matched against the Estrada family from Birmingham, 5 people with strong chemistry and a collectively excellent grasp of survey psychology. The competition was genuine from the opening buzzer, and the audience settled into the kind of engaged attention that a closely matched game produces. Steve Harvey had spent his pre-show time with the Garrison family the way he always does, moving along the line, asking questions, drawing people out. He had spoken with Renee and immediately noticed the quality of her composure. It was not the bright, performative composure of someone excited to be on television. It was the deep, load-bearing composure of a woman who had spent a long time carrying something and had become, through that practice, very good at appearing unburdened. Steve had filed it away, the way he files things, without knowing yet what it was for. He had spoken with Marcus and found him easy and forthcoming, quick with a laugh, generous with detail, the kind of man who presents well in an introduction. Steve had noted, without consciously noting it, that Marcus spoke about himself at somewhat greater length than he spoke about his wife. It was a small thing, not unusual. He filed that away, too. The game progressed through its first 2 rounds with normal energy. Marcus was fast on the buzzer and answered with confidence. Renee contributed 2 strong answers, both of which drew genuine audience applause. Anton and Lisette were excellent. Cora was quiet but accurate when she played. The incident happened midway through the second round, during a brief transition pause between questions, one of those 10-second gaps when the production team resets and the contestants stand at ease and the room breathes. Marcus's phone was in the breast pocket of his jacket. It had been there all day. It vibrated. He reached for it reflexively, the reflex of a man who had been managing a phone carefully for 14 months and whose hand moved toward it with the speed of conditioned response before his conscious mind had registered that he was on a television stage and that his wife was standing 18 inches to his left. He looked at the screen. It was a fraction of a second, the kind of glance a person gives to something they are accustomed to checking quickly and privately. Renee looked at the same moment, not deliberately. Her eye was simply drawn by the motion of his hand, the way eyes are drawn by movement, and she looked down at the phone at the exact moment the screen was visible, and she saw the name of the notification sender, and she read it, and she understood it. Her face did not collapse. It did not produce the kind of reaction that the word exposure might lead a person to expect. No gasp, no tears, no visible breaking. What it produced was something quieter and in its own way more devastating, a stillness so complete that it looked, to anyone watching from a distance, like nothing at all. The stillness of a woman absorbing something enormous into a body that has spent decades learning to absorb enormous things without showing the cost. Marcus had put the phone back into his pocket. He was looking forward. His jaw was set in the specific way of a man who knows that something has happened and is trying, through sheer force of forward-facing stillness, to make it not have happened. Cora had seen both of their faces. Not the phone, she had not been close enough to read the screen, but the faces. And Cora, who had spent 22 years reading rooms, understood with the wordless clarity of someone who has always known that something was wrong and has just been handed the confirmation. Steve Harvey was facing the other side of the stage when the phone vibrated. He had not seen it. But when he turned back to the Garrison side 20 seconds later to set up the next question, he saw Renee's face. And Steve Harvey, who reads faces the way experienced doctors read vital signs, recognized what he was looking at. He did not ask the next question. He stood still for a moment, holding his cue card, and looked at Renee with the attention of a man trying to determine whether what he is seeing is what he thinks he is seeing. Renee met his eyes. Her expression was under full control, but her eyes said something that her expression was working hard to contradict. Steve set the cue card down. "Hold on," Steve said, not to anyone specifically, to the room, to the production clock. To the ordinary momentum of a television afternoon that had just become something other than ordinary. The studio settled immediately. 500 people who had been watching a game show understood, from those 2 words and the quality of stillness that followed them, that something had shifted. Steve walked toward Renee. He stopped at a respectful distance, not close enough to crowd her, close enough to be present. He looked at her with the full, unhurried attention of a man who has decided that the next thing that happens on this stage is going to be determined by this woman and not by him. "Renee," he said quietly, "you okay?" It was the simplest possible question. It was also, in the context of that specific moment on that specific stage, an act of extraordinary consideration, because it asked nothing, claimed nothing, and gave her the complete freedom to answer in whatever way she chose, including the choice to say yes and continue the game and carry the weight back out of the building the way she had carried it in. Renee looked at Steve. The composure held for one more second. Then it shifted, not collapsed, but shifted into something that was not performance and not breakdown, but the very specific expression of a woman who has been asked a direct question by someone who is genuinely willing to hear the answer. "I don't think I am," she said. The audience heard it. The studio went completely quiet. Steve nodded. He did not rush. He did not produce a speech. He turned to the production team and said simply, "Give us a minute." Then he turned back to Renee and said, "Take whatever time you need." What happened in the next several minutes was not broadcast in full. The production team later confirmed that cameras remained running, but that the decision of what to include in the final edit had been made with the family's consent and with careful consideration of what the moment required versus what the audience needed to understand it. What was included was enough. Renee spoke, not to the audience. To Steve, and in doing so to herself, in the way that speaking to someone who is genuinely listening sometimes functions, as the first honest conversation a person has had with their own knowledge about something they have been refusing to fully know. She said that she had been seeing things for over a year, that she had been explaining them away, that she had been doing what she had spent 21 years teaching other people not to do. She had been managing the evidence instead of facing it, because she did not know what facing it would cost. She did not accuse Marcus by name in what was broadcast. She did not need to. The room understood. Marcus stood very still at the contestant podium. His children were watching him with expressions that ranged from confusion to a dawning, terrible comprehension. Steve listened to all of it. When Renee finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that the production team would later describe as the most carefully chosen set of sentences they had heard on that stage in years. "I want to say something," he said, "and I want to say it to every person in this room who has ever been standing somewhere public and felt something private crack open inside them without warning. That is one of the loneliest feelings in the world. And I want you to know, Renee, that you are not alone in this room. Not right now, not today." He paused. "I also want to say this. You have spent 21 years helping families in the hardest moments of their lives. You have walked into broken rooms and helped people find the doors. You know what it takes. And I want you to know that what it takes, you have. Whatever this is, whatever comes next, you have what it takes." Renee put her hand over her mouth. Her daughter Cora moved to her side without a word and stood there, not speaking, simply present in the way that certain people know how to be present when presence is all that is needed. The audience, which had been silent throughout, responded with something that the floor manager later described as the most respectful applause she had ever witnessed in that studio. Not the explosive release of a crowd responding to a climax, but the quiet, sustained sound of 500 people offering something they understood to be inadequate to the weight of the moment, and offering it anyway, because it was what they had. The game did not resume that afternoon. The production team, in consultation with both families and with Steve Harvey, made the decision to conclude the taping and reschedule the Garrison family for a future episode if they chose to return. The Estrada family, who had watched the entire afternoon with the quiet grace of people who understood that they were witnesses to something private, left without complaint and without comment to the press. Their restraint was noted and appreciated by the production team and by the Garrison family, who later reached out to them directly to say so. The episode that aired 8 weeks later was edited with extraordinary care. The segment that included the pause, Steve's 2 words, his walk toward Renee, the conversation that followed, was included with Renee's full consent. She had watched the edit before the air date and had approved it, with one requested change that the production team honored without question. What remained was sufficient to convey the weight of the moment without exposing more of the Garrison family's private life than Renee had chosen to share. The clip was viewed 17 million times within the first 48 hours of airing. It spread primarily through communities of women in their 40s and 50s, women who recognized, with the particular precision of personal experience, the specific quality of Renee's stillness in the moment she looked at that phone, not the drama of the moment. The containment of it, the years of practiced management visible in the single second before the containment shifted. The responses that circulated most widely were not about infidelity as a subject. They were about recognition, the recognition of what it feels like to know something and not yet be able to bear knowing it, to live in the space between awareness and confrontation, carrying the weight of both. Women wrote about that space with a specificity that made clear how many of them had lived in it, and how rarely they had seen it acknowledged publicly with the care that Steve Harvey had brought to it. Steve Harvey addressed the decision to pause the game in a long-form interview recorded 3 months after the episode aired. He was direct about what had moved him to act. "I saw her face," he said. "That is the complete answer. I saw her face, and I knew that something was happening that was more important than anything else that was going to happen that afternoon. And I have a rule. It is not a written rule. It is just a rule I live by, which is that when something real is happening in front of you and you have the ability to respond to it, you respond to it. You do not look away. You do not manage around it. You respond." He said something further that was quoted widely. "I have been in situations where I needed someone to pause everything and ask me if I was okay. Not to fix it, not to solve it, just to stop and ask and to mean the question. I know what it means to be in a room full of people and feel completely alone inside something. So when I saw Renee, I did not think about the show. I thought about that feeling, and I walked over to her." Renee Garrison gave a single extended interview, published in a women's health and lifestyle magazine 5 months after the episode aired. She was precise and thoughtful, and by her own account, had spent considerable time deciding how much to share and why. She spoke about the 14 months of managed awareness. She spoke about the professional irony of being a social worker, someone trained to recognize the signs of avoidance in other people, who had been practicing avoidance so expertly in her own life. She spoke about the specific education of standing on a stage in front of 500 people and having the thing she had been managing simply arrive, undeniable and immediate, without warning. "The phone was almost irrelevant," she said. "I want people to understand that." The phone was the moment, but the moment was not created by the phone. The moment had been building for over a year. What the phone did was remove the option of continuing to manage it. And in retrospect, which is always easier than the actual moment, but still, in retrospect, I think I needed it to be removed. I think part of me somewhere was exhausted by the managing. I think part of me was ready for it to stop. She spoke about what Steve Harvey had said to her on that stage with a care that suggested she had thought about it many times since the day it was said. "He told me I had what it takes," she said. "That sounds like a small thing when you write it down. On that stage in that moment, it was not a small thing. It was the exact thing, because the question I had been living inside for over a year was not what did Marcus do. It was whether I could survive the answer. Whether I was strong enough for whatever came next. And Steve Harvey, who had known me for about 45 minutes, looked at me and told me that I was. I have thought about that many times. I think he was right." Marcus Garrison did not give any public interviews. What happened within the Garrison marriage after the taping was, by all public accounts, a private matter that Renee chose to keep private. She confirmed in her magazine interview that she and Marcus had entered couples counseling and that the process had been, in her words, long and nonlinear and occasionally very hard and occasionally something else entirely. She declined to characterize the outcome. She said that was not a story she was ready to tell and that she was not sure it was a story that needed to be public. The interviewer respected the boundary. What Renee did speak about at length was what happened to her professionally in the months after the episode aired. She received, by her account, hundreds of messages from women who were living in the same managed space she had described, the space between knowing and confronting. Several of those women reached out to her for guidance, and Renee, who was still a licensed social worker, found herself doing something she had not anticipated, counseling informally through email and occasional phone calls, the people who had recognized themselves in her story. This eventually led to a formal partnership with a nonprofit organization focused on supporting women navigating relationship trauma. Renee became an advisor to the organization's peer support program, not a spokesperson, not a public figure, but a practitioner, working in the same register she had always worked in, using the same skills she had spent 21 years developing, now applied to a population she understood from the inside in a way she had not before. She told the magazine interviewer that this felt, surprisingly, like the most coherent development the experience had produced. "I have spent my career helping people find their way through broken things," she said. "I had to go through one of my own to be able to do it properly. I think that is not the worst trade." Cora Garrison, the youngest child who had stood beside her mother without speaking when the moment arrived, graduated the following spring with a degree in psychology. In her commencement reflection, submitted to her university's graduate publication, she wrote about the afternoon in Atlanta in a single paragraph that did not identify the show or her family by name, but was unmistakably specific to anyone who had been there. She wrote, I used to think that strength was the absence of fracture. I watched someone I love fracture in a room full of strangers, and what I saw was not weakness. It was the decision, made in real time without preparation, to let the true thing be true, to stop holding the managed version and let the actual one arrive. I have been trying to learn that ever since. I think it may take a while. Steve Harvey, when the interview in which he discussed the taping was published, received a handwritten letter from Renee. The contents of the letter were not made public. The production team confirmed that Steve had received it and that he had responded. Renee confirmed, in a brief social media post she made some months later, that his response had meant a great deal to her. She did not quote it. She did not need to. What mattered, she wrote, was that he had taken the time, that he had treated her story as something worth a careful and personal reply. That when the cameras were long gone and the moment had receded into clip libraries and comment threads and the ordinary background noise of the internet, a man had sat down and written something true to a woman he had spent 45 minutes with on one afternoon in Atlanta and mailed it and meant it. That, she wrote, is what it looks like when someone sees you, not the pause on the stage. This, someone taking the time after the cameras are off to treat your story as something real. If this story reached you, if it said something about the weight of what we carry quietly, and the relief of being seen by someone who is genuinely paying attention, please hit that like button right now. And if you believe that the most important moments on television are the ones nobody planned for, subscribe to this channel. We bring you stories like this one every single week. Stories about real people, real marriages, and the moments when someone chooses presence over performance. We will see you in the next one.